Well, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to see you all. I have the pleasure of introducing Jameson Stevie to you all. Jameson has spent almost 20 years working in the public policy arena. Prior to joining the Y, Jameson was the executive director at the Martin Prosperity Institute and the Institute for Competitiveness and Prosperity, two of Canada's leading think tanks. Prior to that, Jameson held a number of high-level roles in the provincial government under Premier Dalton McGuinty, including health policy advisor to the Premier, Chief of Staff to the Minister of Health, and Principal Secretary. Some of his policy successes during that time include the implementation of full-day JKSK, or Junior Kindergarten, Senior Kindergarten, significant reduction of surgical wait times, and the implementation of the very complicated HST. Currently, Jameson is the Chief Strategy Officer of the YMCA of GTA and is responsible for marketing, communications, government relations, information technology, research and evaluation, and the implementation of the Y's new strategic plan. Jameson also spends time teaching public policy at both the University of Toronto and McGill University. Jameson holds an honors degree and a Bachelor of Ed from Queen's, an LLB from Dalhousie University, although he keeps telling us he's not a practicing lawyer, but he always seems to slip in his lawyer's advice whenever he gets a chance. And he is a graduate of the Stanford Graduate School of Business. Jameson grew up in the Niagara region, as did I, so I'd like to think that all things good come from Niagara. So welcome, Jameson, to the Y, and over to you.
Thanks, Debbie. Yeah, it's I'm St. Catharines born and bred, and I guess that's where my Y story starts. The background is one thing, but why I started working at the YMCA in August. I've always been drawn to the Y. I was a Y kid, learned to swim at the Y, and my dad was a volunteer and a board member, an avid Membership Plus user. I would say he would be most impressed by the fact that my compensation package, thank you to the CFO, includes a free membership. That's probably the most impressive thing about my entire tenure here so far. So thanks for inviting me today. I'm pleased to talk with you today. I'll start sharing my screen, and I guess I would say either Rich or Diana, I'm not sure who's moderating. Often when I'm sharing your screen, I can't see the other people if they want to raise their hands during my presentation. So if someone could just give me a heads up if there's a hand raised, I'm happy to speak to any issues as we go along. And confirming that you can now see my screen?
Yes.
Great. So I've been asked to speak today both about our strategic plan as well as strategic planning in difficult times. And obviously, on a beautiful sunny day like today, it's easy to forget that the last 2 years have been filled with a lot of ups and downs, a lot of tumult, both for individuals, for society, and for YMCAs across the country. And the YMCA of GTA is no exception to that. Our strategic planning process, we had a revised strategic plan in 2020. This plan is a 5-year plan. It covers the time period from 2020 to 2025. The plan was not modified necessarily during once COVID hit. It was about to be launched right when COVID began, but there was a determination to move on to an implementation plan that had a 15-month period. You'll see there from January 2021 till March 2022, which was the period that we just completed, and then into a 3-year plan in 2022 through 2025. Under MedHat's direction and after some consultation with our board, we decided not to do a 3-year plan, but rather a 1-year plan because the recovery wasn't happening at the same rate that we had anticipated. Much like COVID throughout, things are a little bit slower than we had thought. So we did a 1-year annual plan rather than something for over 3 years. And then one of my main tasks was to look at the KPIs that needed to be developed in monitoring our strategic plan and the progress that we were making against it. There's a great movie quote that I think about strategic planning from a movie called Armageddon. For those of you who are big box, sort of popcorn movie fans, it's a story of a meteor hurtling towards Earth, and the plan they developed to avoid this meteor is to send deep sea miners up into space to put nuclear warheads into the meteor to split it in half so it would avoid Earth. A totally reasonable plan. And they asked one of the miners asks, "What's it going to be like up there?" And they say, "You'll be hurtling at breakneck speeds. They'll be changing temperatures, changing gravity, gas explosions, fire bombs all throughout." And one of the miners says, "So worst conditions imaginable." And I often think that our current efforts at strategic planning, whether you're in the public sector, the private sector, the not-for-profit sector, it's worst conditions imaginable, constantly changing customer expectations, equity issues rising everywhere, fiscal issues, contracting and expanding budgets. So it's a wild ride, but it's one that I'm glad to be along for. You'll see that these are the main pillars of our strategic plan. I'll pause here for a little bit. You'll see across the top, the goal of our strategic plan is to boost well-being and promote equity. I'll get into this a little bit later, but one of my main tasks and challenges when I came on, during my interview process, I asked, so what does the Y mean by well-being and equity? And those terms are relatively undefined. And part of our job as an organization and part of my job as your chief strategy officer is to help define what we mean by that. They are well-meaning terms and terms that people find it easy to get behind, but to lend real definition to them is the challenge. So there's four main pillars, as you can see: championing diversity, social connection, and belonging, addressing key issues, reaching people in new ways, and evolving the ways we work. And then across the bottom, on the horizontal, you'll see our strategic enablers. So these are systems, programs, and the rest that we're trying to bring to life that will help animate pillars 1 through 4. I'd bring your attention to two things here. Number one is pillars 3 and 4, reach people in new ways and evolve the ways we work. I would say those were important when we started this strategic plan, but have become essential as we've moved forward through COVID. Obviously, I'm calling you from my home near High Park. Debbie's at the office. Evolving the ways we work has been foisted upon us in a lot of ways. We're trying to deepen collaborations across our YMCA teams, but developing a new culture, particularly for those of us at the Yonge Street Y. There's been frontline workers obviously out there every day, from childcare to employment to health and fitness, but particularly those of us in some of the leadership positions at the CEO circle level, council level, trying to find ways in which we can interact. I've been at the Y since August, and I've been in the office for 2.5 days. So trying to find ways to deepen my connections with my colleagues, and then reaching people in new ways. As our centers closed for long periods of time throughout these last 2 years, doing more virtual programming, finding ways to really reach out to people in our communities has become increasingly important. And then along the bottom, a healthy, engaged, and inclusive workforce is something that I know Debbie and I and Medhat and Rahima, particularly our Chief People Officer and Chief Human Resources, like all other industries, labor shortages are really causing, throwing a wrench in the works for us. It's a very tight labor market, and trying to hold on to talented people and deepen that connection to our mission, which is why I chose to come to the Y. The mission was meaningful and the impact is profound. And so how do we continue to do that with our existing staff and draw more and diverse and younger staff to the YMCA? So the main focus of our annual plan for 22-23, 4 main components. We're driving on completing the initiatives that were contained in our 15-month plan. You would have seen that in previous annual reports, and it'll be coming out in our annual plan in the weeks to come. A lot of those are around the implementation of services and provisions that we put into our 5-year plan. Main and amongst those, you'll have seen recently, we hosted Prime Minister Trudeau and Premier Ford the Canada-wide Early Learning and Childhood Care Agreement. So there's a $10 a day childcare coming to the province of Ontario and across the country. Our province was the last to sign, but we were proud to say the Y was the host for that event. And the YMCAs of Ontario provide 1/5 of all childcare, profit and not-for-profit, in the province of Ontario. So it's a really meaningful agreement for us, and that's a main focus for us over the next year. Successfully reestablishing our facilities and programs. This is, we are reopening our facilities. Our staff are very excited by that, but trying to find ways to bring people back into, as the kids would say, IRL, in real life, health and fitness, primary amongst them, and the challenges that we're facing there. We're seeing uptick in membership, but it's a sector-wide challenge to try to bring people back into our gyms and our pools. we're trying to dedicate real significant time and effort to supporting a healthy and engaged and inclusive workforce. So for us, this is on at least two fronts. This has been a tough 2 years for a lot of people. So trying to find ways to address people's mental health, support them in their working from home, as well as the challenges that we have as an employer in tackling things like anti-Black racism and equity issues within our workplace. And then lastly, exciting but challenging, we are opening 2 new centers of community here in the GTA. We recently opened our new Vaughan facility, and seeing it's a beautiful and gorgeous facility if you get a chance to check it out. And then the Steve and Sally Stavro YMCA will be opening shortly here in Toronto's East End. So those are, as you will all know from your past experiences, a heavy lift, but really excited about the facilities that we're opening. I will say that one of my main areas of focus and interest has been improving the YMCA's approach to metrics. Sarah Earle, my colleague who's incredibly talented, has been helping me along on this journey. This chart is meant to demonstrate and show that we've tried to break out the way that we tackle our metrics and our measurements within the YMCA GTA. So there are program level measures, and these are obviously indicators. They're going to be specific to each program or project. That's at a programmatic level and not necessarily to bring before a board. We then have key performance indicators, how we're doing on departmental and strategic enablers. Those will click up into each of our areas, Debbie at finance or Wendy in philanthropy, Leslie in operations, and then strategic metrics. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today and show you today. So these are the key metrics that we want to talk about at a CEO council level as well as a board level. When I came on, there were 2 groups of metrics that we were tackling. One was our KPIs contained in our strategic plan, and then others were referred to as promises that the board had looked at and wanted to expand. So we had some 12 to 14 metrics that we were tackling or tracking when I first came on. Most management literature would tell you that somewhere between 3 to 7 metrics are all any one organization can take on at any given time. So these don't speak to every issue that a YMCA of GTA is tackling, but they're where we're trying to bring our focus. So first is the number of registered and unregistered participants in both virtual and in-person programs. We're trying to make sure we capture the number of people who walk through our doors, either in a means like this or in reality. Secondly, the participant perception of the Y's contribution to their well-being. So this goes back to what I was saying before, that the two main goals to boost well-being and promote equity. So we're doing this by way of survey. We are lucky at the YMCA of the GTA that we have a really strong research and evaluation department, and we have an ability to really touch our members through our surveys and in speaking with them about whether the Y has contributed and to what extent to their sense of well-being. So we'll be starting that in the year ahead. We've done some pilot testing of our survey, and we're seeing good results. That people there's a theory of change at the Y, which is the more dose of a Y that you get, the better off your well-being and your connection to the community. And it seems that's being borne out in the surveys that we've done. Metric number 3, participant perception of the Y's contribution to their sense of belonging to their local community. So this is a new area for us. The YMCA and YMCAs generally haven't always captured equity data. So this is demographic data around people's socioeconomic status, their racial backgrounds, gender, and the like. We have targeted programs at the YMCA GTA and a new diversity officer at the Y. And we're trying to get a sense of those people that do participate in those targeted programs. Are those programs benefiting them? Are they enjoying those programs? Would it encourage them to come back to the Y and encourage them to invite other people to join the Y? Really what I'm trying to help the Y achieve is to make sure that the community that walks through our door is representative of the community that we say we're trying to serve, and that is in our neighboring communities outside of our centers and here in Toronto. The next one, close to Debbie's heart, a positive gross contribution. That is something that we want to achieve, obviously, on an ongoing basis to make sure we are fiscally sustainable, especially in the years ahead. Metric number 5. This is a good example of one of the changes we've made. Previously, the metric that was there for fundraising was the number of monthly donors. In speaking with our fundraising team and with our head of philanthropy, we decided that the board and the CEO council was far more interested in the annual amount raised through fundraising. The KPI for the department was key to get more monthly donors, we want to make sure we hit our annual targets, particularly on our capital campaign. We wanted to make these metrics meaningful and intentional with our leadership team. And then the last two really do speak to our health as an organization. So we're working with an organization called WorkWell, and Rahima has carriage of these two metrics. One is our organizational wellness score, which captures how people are participating in the workplace, feeling about their workplace and their connectivity to it. And then our employee authenticity score, which is around our racial diversity and ethnic makeup. And we're trying to capture some of those raw numbers as well. So I'm really proud about that. I think it's, I don't know about your experiences, but I know when I sign my kids up to anything these days, I have to go through about 5 or 6 questions around our background, the background of my children, to make sure that increasingly organizations, particularly in the not-for-profit space, are trying to make sure they're offering services to a diversity of people. There's obviously challenges and opportunities, and this is where I thought a lot of our conversation would be focused today. So I put down 4. Number 1, emerging from COVID. So I think whether it's past us or not, based on my experiences out of my day-to-day, people seem to have moved past COVID, whether that is out of desire or out of health data is yet to be determined. But we as an organization need to decide on how we're going to rebuild our organization. What is our portfolio going to look like? And what does recovery look like for us? Is that 100% of capacity back to February 2020, or is it a different type of mix? And that's a conversation ongoing. One, from a chief strategy officer perspective, one of the things that I'm trying to focus my time on is there's 2 ways to innovate or to get better. One is improve the efficiency of the systems that already exist. And that's probably about 80% of where I'm trying to spend my time. How do we get better at delivering the services that we're currently delivering? But I'm also trying to spend about, 1 out of every 5 days, 1/5 of my time thinking about and imagining what else we could be doing. What are the innovative practices that we can get into? Here at the YGTA, the Academy is a great example. At some point, we decided that was a business we wanted to get into. What are the lessons we can learn from innovating and bringing that forward? At one point, we decided to get into childcare. That was a great decision. It's proven to be both socially responsible and fiscally sustainable for the organization. So what are those next frontiers that the YMCA might think about expanding to? Next is that piece about uncertainty abounding. We're in the midst of a provincial election. I'm glad not to be participating in it. I wish them all well. I did my time in politics, but after this election and the municipal election, it's going to be interesting to see what happens to government funding to the not-for-profit sector broadly and to our programming specifically. So there is going to be some financial uncertainty, both from a philanthropic and a government perspective. And what do participants want? What are they looking for as part of their go forward? Our camping program is going to be ramping back up this summer. It'll be intriguing to see how participants jump back in with 2 feet on that one and what services they're looking for. And then lastly, this is a personal bugaboo. The language that you keep hearing, particularly out of the States, is, we're not going to return to status quo. We're going to build back better. I would say that's great rhetoric. What do we mean by that? There were some great inequities seen across, particularly the GTA. This was a virus and a disease that was experienced very differently depending on where you lived and what your socioeconomic status was. How can the Y contribute to the conversation in a real tangible way as to what Build Back Better might look like, and how can we help shape that? So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to this group. If you do want to talk about the provincial election, I guess I'm happy to do that too, but more happy to focus on the work of the YMCA. And thanks again for having me here today. And hopefully that went off without a hitch from a technical perspective. So thanks, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Jameson. We're going to turn it over to Diana Deacon-Thomas. She's going to coordinate the Q's and A's, and I just want to note that Medhat has joined us, and we'll provide some time for Medhat after Jameson's presentation is concluded.
Great, thanks, Rich. Thanks, Jameson. So I've just sent a note to everyone. If you have a question that you want to type in and send to me, you can do that. Or if you prefer, you can raise your hand, and I'll try to see if I can see the full screen and see if you're putting your hand up. Let me just get to that. Okay. I have to say though, Jameson, I cannot imagine doing this work in our world right now with so many unknowns and so much going on. And hats off to the whole team. You too, Matt.
Yeah, you know, it's really impressive. I feel like I actually got the easy ride, Diana, that I came on in August when there was at least a little bit more certainty. But when you look back at how this organization was run from March, you know, in my house, we call it March 13th, right?
Yeah.
March 13th is when COVID kicked off, because that was the longest March break my family will ever experience. And the way that they handled themselves, emergency childcare, sudden closures, new PPEs almost every week for health and fitness, new protocols. You know, it's been remarkable at how well the team has been able to adapt. That comes with it some costs, right? I think from a staff perspective, anytime I feel like I have some burdens having worked from home, I think about Linda Cottis and her team, who's been trying to provide childcare throughout this period under changing regulations and rules constantly. So kudos and hats off to them. And I think we've come through it with flying colors, especially when compared to other organizations similar, like other YMCAs across the province. So it's pretty remarkable. But the fun work begins now. I kind of believe that the next 2 years are going to be almost as hard, if not harder than the last 2 years, because there's going to be significant challenges and decisions to be made. But we're looking forward to it. I think we're up to the challenge.
Glad to hear that. So I do have a question for you, and it's coming from Marilyn. I agree that measuring improved wellness is critical. How will you measure that?
So as of right, it's a great point. As of right now, what we're trying to do, Marilyn, is get a baseline of self-assessment from people. It's not a perfect tool, but it's the best tool right now by way of a survey of how they're ranking their wellness and the YMCA's contribution to that. Part of the reason we've done that is everyone's going to have an own self-definition of what that's going to look like, as opposed to, you know, forcing a definition of wellness upon them. And then on an annual basis, we'll be reporting back through our annual report and our annual plan as to how people's wellness is going up or down. We're also participating in a social capital study along with the Toronto Foundation, United Way, Metcalf Foundation, to get a sense of how people are feeling as far as a connection to their community coming out of COVID. It'll be interesting though, Marilyn. The survey is going to field in the next couple of weeks. There's a reason the election is June 2nd. People feel pretty good when the weather's turning great and COVID is over. So there might be a bit of a bump that people are feeling a lot better from their social connectivity right now than they will be maybe in a couple months. But we'd like to try to capitalize on that. But that's the answer. We're going to do an annual survey of people's wellness.
Okay, thanks. I hope that that you get good uptake on the survey, and I hope we get that improved weather in Manitoba soon, so that we can also start to feel optimistic.
We'll send it. We'll this week has been rather spectacular. That's great. So we'll transfer payment by weather. We'll see if we can accomplish that.
We can send you some water. Thank you.
I have another one for you, Jameson, and it comes from Franco. In our community, the pandemic has shown the need for greater intentional collaboration among organizations in the social sector. Is this a factor for you, and how do you see it reflected in your strategic plan?
Yes. So I would say I'll be self-critical first, Franco. The YMCA, because we deliver such excellence on our operations in a variety of areas, it's occasionally a challenge to think about partnerships because we're so capable at doing things on our own, right? Like there's a problem and we say, oh, you know, I've got a screwdriver for that one. I can get at it. Part of my approach, and I think part of the reason I got hired was because of my ability to make partnerships across a number of sectors. So it is embedded in the strategic plan that we'll be looking for particular partnerships. And I'll use an example. We keep playing with the notion, Franco, of housing as a possible file for us to get involved in. I think Wise across Canada are thinking about the same. The challenge being sort of with the absence of expertise, choosing a particular area of housing to move from emergency housing to affordable is a real challenge. So I've just been invited to join a thing called the Champions Circle with the Blue Door Shelter. They are on the ground providing housing to a variety of folks. My intention is not only to bring a Y voice, but also to learn I've also reached out to an organization called TAS, which provides social impact housing. And there's also the federal government's put out a bunch of money around rapid housing. So that would be an example of where I think the Y can increasingly be a partner and a platform for other people to provide services, and that we can be an area, find our way into those areas to be useful. A second one is a great example. We recently had a briefing around youth mental health. I know every group was really adversely affected by pandemic, but if you have anyone between the ages of 15 and 24 in your life, they got hammered. Like, you think about a 16-year-old who was in March of 2020, no prom, no teams, no extracurriculars, no social connections. Now they're in first year, they're sitting in a residence and maybe online. And when I think about my experience from, sort of 16 to 20, it's just a fundamental difference. And so what can we do to be a safe haven for those kids going through some of those experiences? Maybe a source of a job, maybe a source of connectivity. We don't provide directly mental health services, but who could we partner with to be useful to those groups? So those are two examples of where we're trying to find ways to establish real partnerships.
Thanks, Jameson. Oh, I see Martha has her hand up. Thanks, Martha. Can you unmute yourself?
And Saul does as well, Diana, just if that's helpful.
I know that's a very old-fashioned way, but I've been working for ages trying to find the crazy hand going up. I think it's outsunning itself. I don't know. So first, thank you. And just as a little aside on the housing issue, I don't know if you reached out to or know Michael Grathwaite, who worked for the Y for years. Many of the people in this call would know him. And he happens to be on another board I'm on, but he has been the CEO of a couple of housing organizations, intimately involved with the Y, a real advocate on behalf of various populations, would might be an interesting contact for you. So that's just a heads up. My other comment, somewhat self-serving, but I'm lucky to be self-serving in a category that hopefully I'll leave in the next couple of months. And that's the disability community. And I'm just wondering, in terms of looking forward in terms of equity, if one of those new 20% boxes is increasing the outreach or continuing to be attuned to the outreach for those who in particular are immune compromised. I think the video connection that came because of COVID has actually served many populations well. And if you read the literature or the media right now, there's a lot written to say that there's huge population, those who've had transplants, those who are on particular drugs, those who have physical disabilities or invisible disabilities, who really are being isolated as the rest of the world opens up. And I'm wondering what the role the Y has to play. And my classic example is I live and breathe for Aquafit. And the first thing I'm going to do once my immune system changes is be back in that pool at the Central Y. And it's killing me not to do that. And, and again, I say mine is short term, but people's aren't. So I think that's a population that's being ignored as we put COVID behind us.
Yeah, so thank you for the question. So first, to your first point, it's like I planted you in this call, Martha. The Blue Door organization that I mentioned, I'm joining their champion circle. Mike is the CEO.
There you go.
And Mike and I went to high school together. So we go back a long way. So yeah, that's exactly who I'm partnering with. And he used to be the GM at the St. Catharines YMCA. So we've traveled around the sun together a couple of times. So
Okay.
and then on your particular population, thank you for that. I think we're in the early days of figuring out what sort of an equity outreach looks like. And I think that was a blind spot for me. I hadn't thought about that particular immunocompromised group for sure, like the broader disability and differently abled community. But that's an interesting point to make. I do think, this meeting is a great example. I've been on a couple boards for the last 2 years. The barriers to entry now are so low. Before, if you tried to run a video session on anything, in February 2020, people would have gotten so irate with you and angry. And now it's the opposite. When you tell people you want to meet in person, there's a lot of, oh, I gotta get on the subway. Why can't I just have my coffee on my back deck? And this is just as good. So I do think it's opened up a whole new world for us and a whole new constituency. So thank you for pointing it out.
Thank you.
Oh, I think you're muted, Diana. Sorry. There has to be one every call, Diana. There you go.
There is. I've been working on this. I do see that Saul has his hand up. So Saul, could you go ahead, please?
Sure. With the government cutting back on its COVID supports, I know a lot of nonprofits and charities, and I assume the Y was one of them, was heavily counted on that wage subsidies and some other subsidies. With that going away, how long do you think before some of the facilities, your full facilities, especially the 2 new ones, might become sustainable?
Might become unsustainable, or might be...
No, sustainable. How long do you think before they could become sustainable? After the
It's a great question. I think there's 2 components to it. For sure, the federal government supports around CEWS and others have been very beneficial to organizations like ours and others. I think one of the challenges that I've seen, and one of the things I want to try to tackle in the year ahead, I'll give you an example, Saul. You guys would know this. When things started going sideways from a COVID perspective, we reached out to the province. And of course, the province said we should talk to the Trillium Foundation. The Trillium Foundation grants are in the range of 150 to 200 grand. We're such a rare beast in the not-for-profit sector. And we don't quite fit any of the boxes that the province has from an operations perspective. I mean, we were a $250, $300 million organization going in. I joked to one provincial guy, I said, just send us the Trillium Fund. Well, that sounds like a good idea. From a long-term sustainability, I mean, some of it's going to depend on people's return to facilities. So it's a difficult question to answer right now. I think a lot of that is around the health and fitness side. Childcare is already seeing a pretty rapid return. The main challenge we're having from a childcare perspective is human resources. It's to work at our licensed capacity. We're trying to get people back to work or to fill the spaces that we had. So I don't have a great answer for you yet, but it's something that MedHat and Debbie and I are trying to tackle right now. So, but it's definitely a challenging situation.
Thank you. And Patricia, you've got the special yellow hand up. Thank you. Why don't you go ahead and unmute yourself?
Thanks, Diana. Yeah, and for everyone's information, you can find it under reactions, and you can also lower your hand there too. So I know it's hard to locate. So a couple of things. Just thanks so much, Jameson and MedHat. YMCA GTA has always led the way, and we certainly see it here. MedHat and I used to talk about determinants of health, and although that language perhaps sounds a bit dated, honestly, the YMCA of Greater Toronto Area is working in most of the areas of the determinants of health. And you just have to talk about health in a very wide-reaching perspective. So housing, which I'm sure Franco's very interested in, hearing that Toronto may push more work that way is great. And that's a huge determinant, and there's evidence to support that. From a World Alliance perspective, a World YMCA perspective, there was an agreement in 2012 in Nairobi that the common focus of YMCAs is on youth. That does not mean that that we can all work in different ways and with different demographics, but that we all did work on youth. So I'm really happy to hear that you recognize that this COVID has a tremendous negative impact on youth and that you're looking to somehow help that out. And then the other piece I wanted to say was from an impact measurement perspective, for so long, my background is in health administration. We did output, and then we tried to do outcome, and now we're trying to do impact. And I can see that you're working very hard on developing those impact measurements with your 7 strategic metrics. And I hope that GTA has always been so generous in sharing your work. And you do have lots of resources in terms of your research, which was forward thinking when it was developed. I hope that you'll share that not only nationally, which I know you do, but internationally. MedHat, I don't know if you've got people from GTA speaking at World Council. If you don't, you should have, because this is some just tremendous work. The last thing I'll say is I had the privilege of sitting in on some of Y Canada's AGM the last 3 days, and today's the last day. And they, you know, their theme, YMCA, a driving force for good, truly well done. You're just doing some tremendous work, and it must be so interesting for you coming to this organization, Jameson, where you had been, where you could also do good work, but this is clearly dedicated as a non-for-profit to that broad goal. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. A couple of reactions. Yeah, I'll take the last point first. Not that I didn't enjoy working at the University of Toronto, and not that it's not a wonderful institution, but to be back in a mission-based organization is really fulfilling. I love teaching, and I loved being around, which is why I appreciate everyone raising their hand. I'm a recovering teacher as well as a recovering lawyer. But the meaning of the work is just so profound, and I've kind of made it a bit of a goal to get out to as many sites as I can, just to connect myself with the people and that are doing the work and for whom it's being done. So thank you for that comment. On the social determinants of health, one of my mentors is Charles Pascal, who did a lot of the work with Paul Martin back in the days of the social determinants of health. And a slight rant. I'm kind of shocked that neither the federal election nor the provincial election nor a mayoral election here seem to be talking about public health aspects. It's all cost of living, which I get, but the public health benefits of social infrastructure, I think, and the Y is a key part of that social infrastructure. I'm in conversations with Nick Saul. I don't know if you know Nick, runs the Community Food Network. Nick's a friend, and we had this idea the other day. We were saying when our parents were growing up, social infrastructure was, rush care area, the school, the church, the hospital, that all kind of sit next to each other in a small community. And now it's a YMCA, a community health center, a food stop, right? Like these are the things that are probably essential to a successful community. So I'm with you. On the youth, I really do think we can be a more zealous advocate and a voice for it. Perhaps you saw MedHat's op-ed just last week that got a lot of pickup in the Toronto Star papers. We were articulating it's a constituency that doesn't often get a voice. God bless the baby boomers, I say to this group, but perhaps occasionally we can do things for the group coming behind as well. And I think the Y can be a good advocate for that. And on the measurements, thank you for articulating that. Yeah, we are trying to take it. When I got here, a lot of the measurements were outputs, numbers of things, how many we do. We're trying to get to that outcome piece. Like, for example, I'd love to be able to do a longitudinal study of a kid who goes through a YMCA childcare versus any other childcare. Are their outcomes dramatically different? My guess is yes. My guess is if you go through a high quality wild childcare, your EQAO scores are better, your health and fitness is better, your connection to your community. So I keep playing with the notion that the C in YMCA is probably citizenship more than anything now, and proud to be a part of it. But yeah, I'm a dad. So you saw me get a kiss before you left. I got a 12-year-old and an 8-year-old. So they're what keep me up at night. So that's what's driving me in my day to day.
Thank you.
I know that I believe, is it Franco has his hand up again? Franco, am I right?
I didn't want to hog the platform here today. But I'm really appreciative, and I'm just always keen to learn more. And so I really appreciated your presentation and the great work that Patricia so well articulated. My question, I think, would be out here, truth and reconciliation, Indigenous relations is just getting more and more airtime. And maybe this is getting a little bit further down into the weeds relative to your strategic plan, but I'd love to hear anything that you're kind of seeing going forward. Because again, that's one of those groups, particularly through the pandemic, out here at least, that really just said, you talk about the vulnerability and so on like that. It was there to begin with, but with the pandemic, it absolutely became just, anyway, beyond the pale. So any comments there? And like, I could ask you a lot more questions, but there's lots of other people. But thank you.
No, well, so let me say, I guess, two answers. One is, in my experience so far, I've been really impressed that the Y walks the walk when it comes to reconciliation. It does seem to be an active part of who we are, how we treat each other, the language that we use. And so I think it is front and center. The second one is, and I don't quite know what to do with this yet, Franco, but well, I'll ask you the question. How many acres of outdoor space do you think the YMCA of the GTA owns? Like land? We own 1,000 acres. Cedar Glen is between Pinecrest and Cedar Glen, you combine those two together, it's a little bit over 1,000 acres. Having visited both of those places, and as a guy who's lived in Toronto, I had no idea that was the case. So there's a land aspect to this, and when meeting with Brandon and the folks up at Pinecrest, there's a real effort to try to come to terms with our past, particularly at Pinecrest, about what that means in interacting with Indigenous communities and the land-based activities happening up at Cedar Glen. So those would be my, the places that I've seen it and been able to touch it. But I think it's ongoing. I think a lot of us have seen organizations where they do the land acknowledgement, and that's kind of the extent of their reconciliation activities. I don't think we're that kind of organization. I think there's more work to be done.
Terrific. Thank you, Jameson. I'm just looking through to see if I don't have any more in the chat. I'm looking to see if I have any other hands up.
I'm waiting for MedHat to ask me a question that I can't answer, and then my technology will somehow break up and I won't be able to answer. But.
Well, I'm wondering. Oh, hi, MedHat. I'm wondering if I'm supposed to go to MedHat now, Rich, or if I should.
No, Diana. We'll go to Julie now.
Okay. So I'm going to say my thanks to you, Jameson, but I am going to pass the floor over to Julie McIntyre, who is, of course, on the executive of the YGTA alumni and good friend, good volunteer. And thank you, Julie, and thank you again, Jameson.
Thanks, Diana. And Jameson, I really want to thank you on behalf of everyone here and the Y. I think I personally am really impressed with both your articulate voice on behalf of the Y and your obvious heartfelt connection to the Y. I'm happy to know that all good things come from Niagara, but I'm glad that you touched base at Queen's, my alma mater. So, and but I was prepared, especially when you started talking about Armageddon and what I thought. I wasn't prepared to come away feeling so optimistic as to what the future holds, because I think you paint a picture of somebody who is trying to think in all directions. I can't imagine dealing with all that you have on your plate. When those things were listed, it's just, okay, too many balls for any one juggler, but I think it sounds like you have the tools to manage them. And I would encourage you, if you can, to maintain that 1/5 of your day in imagining, because I think that's the key, one of the key things. I think we get so busy in our day-to-day stuff that we have no time for reflection. And, they say the best time for that kind of thing is in the shower, doing something mindless. So, take lots of showers and let your mind expand. And thank you so much for sharing today on behalf of everyone.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Yeah, no, it's a great job and it's a great organization. So I'm having a lot of fun, but thank you for the kind words.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Jameson. Thank you, Diana. Medhat, would you like to say something? Medhat, you're on mute. There you go.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to see everybody. I was supposed to be at the mayor's luncheon in Vaughan, but I wasn't able to go, so I'm glad to be able to drop in and see you all. And thank you, Jameson, for your presentation. We've talked about how how we've been able to respond to the pandemic and to be in a position we're in now financially and also as an organization. And I'd just like to ask Debbie to go on video. You know, March 13th, 2020, I was told to go home for 2 weeks. And it's been the longest 2 weeks in my life. But we started planning the response to the pandemic in January of 2020, believe it or not. And that was because of Debbie's leadership and her team that came together and started to tell us how we should be responding. So, you know, Debbie deserves a lot of credit for where we are today. And it was also Debbie who ensured that we made some tough decisions financially, that if she hadn't have made those decisions, we would be having a different, we may not even be having a conversation today. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And I wanted to say, you know, let people know that, you know, that Debbie's leadership has been instrumental and incredible in terms of where we are today. So.
Thank you for your kind words, Medhat. As we always say, we're a team. We do it together.
Yeah. Debbie's very humble. She never likes to take credit. Humility tends to be one of the attributes of our senior team. So, but I can tell you as a CEO, without Debbie, it would have been very difficult. And Debbie's biggest strength is her ability to criticize me. So she holds my feet to the ground, and she always tells me, she tells me what I need to do.
I would say I'm very honest. Don't hold back.
So, and from early on in the pandemic, you know, we talked about the strategy that we refer to as stable and able, that we need to make sure the organization was stable, but that we wanted to be able to be a significant part of the recovery and the renewal. We realized that as intense as the response to the pandemic would be, the level of intensity in the recovery and the renewal would be different, but would be just as deep. And so the stable and able has been sort of our motto as we've moved forward, because we know that coming out of the pandemic, people will need the YMCA a lot more than they needed it before. So, and I always tell people that at our best, at the Y, we ignite three senses: the sense of belonging, the sense of purpose, and the sense of community. And those have been missing for a lot of people. And we're seeing as people come back how they really have appreciated what they've missed in terms of that sense of purpose, sense of belonging, and sense of community that we're able to provide. Right now, our programs are at 55% of where they were before the pandemic, which is much better than we thought. And we'll keep on working. And one of the things we decided was we're going to continue to build because we know that there will be a lot of needs for more YMCA programs and in more communities. Our motto has been to bring more YMCA programs to more communities, to more people in more communities, because we know when people have access to our services from a social determinants of health perspective, they have a better shot at better health. So, but you know, we have our challenges, big challenges moving forward, and we're committed to addressing those challenges. So I'll stop there, and I'll take any questions you may have for me. We'll turn it back to Rich.
If anyone has a question of Medhat, please raise your hand. Yes, Franco.
You shouldn't have asked, Rich. But Medhat, I'm just wondering how you, this is going to get a little personal because you and I go back a long ways. And with the announcement of your retirement, how are you feeling these days?
As I said to the board, I've got 14 months and I can still do a lot of damage in 14 months. Debbie would tell you I could do a lot of damage in one day. So I'm feeling, because I've been deliberating whether it should be 2024, 2025. And the deliberation has been stressful for me. So once I made the decision, I think it was the right decision. And the clarity is really kind of taking sort of a monkey off my shoulders. And what I've been very focused on is what do we need to do over the next 14 months that I need to be a part of. I'm not even thinking about retirement and what I'm going to, people ask me, what are you going to do when you retire? I said, I have no idea. I'll figure that out. But there's enough challenges and opportunities on our plate right now that I need to really be sort of 100% full speed ahead on what needs to happen. I've shared with the board what those priorities are. I've shared with the team what those priorities are, and we're working together on that. So it's given me some clarity. It is a tough decision, and all of you have gone through it. And it's, I do have mixed emotions. Some days I get excited and say maybe I'll stay till 2025, and then I say no, that's not a good idea. And I think it's best for me and for the association to have that clarity.
Okay, thank you very much, Medhat. I think that pretty well summarizes where Medhat is now. We have another part of our agenda, but I'm going to forego that. And the reason I'm going to forego it is there's not enough